Well, hi everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Adam's Music Box. And today is a very, very special 200th year anniversary because it was today, 200 years ago in Vienna, that the most important work in music history, in my opinion, but also in the opinion of others, was premiered. It was heard for the first time, and this was the final symphony of Beethoven, Beethoven's Ninth, the Chorale Symphony. And it changed everything. Before Beethoven, and particularly before the Ninth, everything was different. And after the Ninth, everything was chasing this absolute monument to utter musical perfection. Now, Beethoven was always a revolutionary, long before the Ninth was premiered. From his Third Symphony, which was in many ways his breakout orchestral piece, the Eroica Symphony, first dedicated to Napoleon, then he angrily got rid of that dedication. All the way through the Ninth, Beethoven was all about breaking the boundaries of what was the symphonic form and what was music more widely. Beethoven injected passion that had never been heard before into the music, which is why, even though he was technically within the classical period of European music, he was in many ways the founder of the Romantic era because of his eye to detail in terms of impassioned harmonics, melody, rhythm, all of these things that simply combined to make him superlative. And he was the father of the modern romantic music scene, which took music out of the aristocratic parlor and drawing room, out of the chamber in an aristocrat or wealthy person's house, and into the modern big concert hall. This led to orchestras growing in size and in technical dexterity and virtuosity. It gave birth to the idea that a conductor is more than merely a time beater, but a true artist, interpreting and reinterpreting, and even in some cases revising the work to make it something living, breathing, and unique to a moment in time and an experience shared by the audience. The most famous composer of the second half of the 20th century in Europe, Richard Wagner, understood this. And in his essays and in his teachings on composing, and more importantly, on conducting, he explained how Beethoven is all about unleashing the beast, if you will, unleashing this musical beast within. And it was that school that Wagner created, this school of thought regarding conducting, that was truly the birth of romantic Western performance, European performance. Beethoven provided the template as the composer, Wagner carried that forward as a composer, and Wagner asserted this school of conducting that is really the authentic, natural way Beethoven should be performed. And although, unfortunately, Wagner wasn't around when the age of recording came, he just missed it, nor were people like Hans von Bülow, another great mid 19th century conductor. By the time we get to the late 19th century, we do have contemporaries of the Wagner school, people like Franz Schlag, who were recorded, although he sadly didn't record the ninth. And coming out of this tradition, we have the two titans of the early recorded age, really throughout the first half of the 20th century, from the early to the mature recorded age. And these were, of course, Wilhelm Furtwängler and Wilhelm Mengelberg. Now, I'm going to put links to their versions of Beethoven's Ninth in the little description below, but to understand why this is important, from the age of Beethoven to the age of Wagner, and from the age of Wagner into the first half of the 20th century, the essence of performing Beethoven was communicated from one generation to another, from master to student, from peer to peer. And so when we hear the recordings of Furtwängler and Mengelberg, we're hearing the first time something was recorded that gave us in the modern age an ear into what it was like in the era when Beethoven's music was truly shaped. This was a tradition passed down orally before there was recording from one generation of maestros to another about how Beethoven was supposed to be larger than life, that nothing was to equal it, as though it was a city, and the tallest skyscraper with the widest foundation was Beethoven's music. And the crowning achievement of all of Beethoven's music was, of course, his Ninth Symphony. Now, I titled this video The War on Beethoven, and it's a musical war that's very real because in the second half of the 20th century, this great romantic tradition of Beethoven that Wagner wrote about and that existed throughout the 19th and into the 20th century, some scholars who I frankly think were quite stupid decided to say, oh no, this is incorrect Beethoven, even though it had literally been passed on from generation to generation in Viennese and other Central and Western European circles where people had lived in Beethoven's lifetime, and then this generation passed it on to this generation, much like Homer's poetry was passed on among the ancient Hellenic people. And eventually it was written down, just as eventually, by the age of recording, Furtwängler, Mengelberg, and a few others of that tradition were recorded. Now, the people who came around in the second half of the 20th century called themselves quite disingenuously historically informed performance specialist, or HIP, although there was nothing hip about it. And their whole agenda was to suck the life out of Beethoven's music so that it was performed metronomically with weak dynamics, with small orchestras, sometimes even with inferior instruments because, oh, they wanted to recreate the sound of the premiere. Well, the premiere, while a very historic event, was fraught with mistakes because the orchestra were under rehearsed, which is why people in Beethoven's lifetime and those who lived shortly thereafter, and then eventually in the time of Wagner in the mid and late 19th century, they resolved to find the actual essence of authentic Beethoven, which was played to perfection with a large orchestra, huge dynamics. Tempi rubati, meaning flexibility of tempo, which is the essence of all European classical music, particularly in this period, because they knew that they, as contemporaries and then successors to Beethoven, allies of Beethoven, that they owed the music to have its true authenticity, which meant to make it as beautiful, as robust, and as memorable as possible. But these HIP people thought the opposite. They essentially want to make the music sound as bad as it did at the premiere. I'm not saying that they're not allowed to do it. Of course they are. It's a supposedly free country, supposedly free world. Not really, but we like to, believe and then achieve, which would be a nice ideal. But even the scholarship was fraught with a lot of mistakes. They looked at some of suggested tempi markings in the initial scores, only to be rebuffed by the fact that music critics at the time described the tempi that Beethoven himself conducted as, surprise, surprise, more akin to that of his successors like Wagner and Furtwängler and Mengelberg, rather than like the people looking at what was written on the page. And there are many theories for it. One, that it was a suggestion that Beethoven himself ignored. Two, that his metronome wasn't calibrated right and therefore was broken. And so there's a danger that is revealed by this HIP approach to Beethoven's music, which is that in looking for the detailed minutiae of trying to create authenticity, they're actually doing the opposite. Not only are they sucking the life and the beauty and the essence out of the music, but they're also not even accurate. The one claim that they say they have going for them, which is accuracy, and according to the very written words of the people in Beethoven's lifetime and those of successors to his artistic and intellectual tradition, like Wagner, that they're not even correct. They're not even accurate, even though they claim to be. Sadly, their tentacles have been wrapped around even so-called mainstream performances of Beethoven over the last 40 and in some cases even 50 years, which is why you really need to go back to those titans of European romantic tradition to hear the real Beethoven, the moving Beethoven. You would think it's hard to make Beethoven boring because he was anything but these so-called historically informed performances make him just that. They make him boring. Um, However, when you hear Beethoven played the correct way, the actual, authentic way, it's one of the most moving and life-affirming experiences. And if it's your first time hearing the piece or the first time hearing it done in the right, authentic way, then you'll know that it is life-changing. What's also interesting is that there's no one authentic way, so to speak. There is an authentic tradition. So while, just for instance, Mengelberg and Furtwängler conducted the Ninth Symphony and all Beethoven symphonies very differently, it is all within this tradition of Beethoven as beauty, Beethoven as majesty, Beethoven as regal, Beethoven as monumental, Beethoven as modern in the purest sense of all of those words. It changed the way Europeans thought of music, how they consumed music. It was now a public affair rather than a private affair that sometimes the public were allowed to participate in. I'm talking about orchestral music. It was something that became quite literally, in some cases, anthemic. The music itself, it's you feel the soil upon which Beethoven stood. You feel the blood that was coursing through his veins, the anguish in his mind, the feelings that he must have felt throughout his life, and particularly when he was composing this piece. There's simply, I love all music, but Beethoven's Ninth does stand like a pyramid in the desert, just like those mighty Egyptians built, just like the Roman Colosseum, the Hellenic Parthenon in Athens, the Great Wall of China, the Taj Mahal. Beethoven's Ninth is just one such monument, only it's for the ear and therefore for the soul. So enjoy it. Happy anniversary to this wonderful piece of music and get to listening. You won't be disappointed. Like, subscribe. We will see you next time. Take care.